Eamon, a very interesting witness this afternoon in day 8. I missed day 7, did I?
No, it's day 8. You did. You missed.
I missed day 7 on Friday.
Niall took over.
Of the trial of Richard Satchwell for the murder of his wife Tina. But the afternoon witness, Niamh McCullough, a forensic archaeologist, like what is that?
So Dr. Niamh McCullough, a forensic archaeologist, was describing that they basically use the skills of an archaeologist, but in a criminal context. So
right,
they in this case, they literally approach it as if they were somebody out in, I don't know, in the ruins of an Egyptian pyramid, and they carefully and slowly work layer by layer through the soil, through the material to uncover whatever object it is. And in this case, it was a body. It was the body of Tina Satchwell, as we come to find.
Under the stairs in the home in Fermoy that she shared with Richard Satchwell. So what's Dr. McCullough's background? Did she talk about what sort of cases she's
under
worked?
Cross-examination, she was actually asked just to go into more about her background, and she was saying she'd been involved in terms of the criminal context since 2006, and that she's worked with bodies such as the Independent Commission for the Locations of Victims' Remains. So this is the people who were disappeared during the Troubles. She was also involved in the mother and baby homes as well as having worked with the Gardaí on numerous occasions, and and a number of UK police forces over the years as well. So she's probably one of the most experienced people in this area of this.
And is she called in when a body is found, or does she have any sort of a profiling role as regards where to look for a body?
I'm sure it changes from case to case, but in this one, we find out from her evidence that she was contacted by the detective inspector, the senior officer at the time, Anne-Marie Toomey, now a superintendent. So she contacted Dr. McCullough and asked her if she would be able to put together a report. Would it be of any use? And that, I think that first contact was in September 2023, and I think she reviewed whatever information was made available to her at that time. And I think in November that year, then what she said in evidence was that, yes, I think I can help you here. And so, but she had to wait for more information to come through. And that report was delivered then in 2023, in September 23. So the initial contact was in 2022, and a year later then she did her final report after she'd finally got the full information that she was looking for.
Really good place to recap then, So what information was she given at that point? What did we know, or did the Gardaí know at that point?
She was given everything. She was told, she explained that, she got a USB key with all the files on it. And it did actually take quite some time to go through, particularly when it was updated. This is basically the incident room in electronic form. So she basically had access to everything, all the statements, all the photographs from the first search in June 2017. I suppose, the media interviews, etc. Everything she had access to everything that the guards had, presumably. So this would include some of the stuff that we've talked about, like, the phone records and all the rest. So the idea was that she was then to come up with some recommendations from, this archaeologist's point of view. So she was looking for areas or possible locations for a body disposal. And that's what she was kind of brought in to identify.
So in 22, when she's initially brought in, has the then detective inspector Anne-Marie Toomey just taken over the case? And we sort of described it as she was essentially took over and started an almost cold case review of it. She started just going back over and getting her team to go back over all the statements, the CCTV, revisit anything that needed to be revisited, and focusing on Satchwell really as the suspect.
Yeah, and one of the things that the DI did was to contact Dr. McCullough, and it was put to Dr. McCullough today. So you were kind of a fresh set of eyes, and he says, true, but only with the specific goal of looking at a location where human remains could be clandestinely concealed. Like they've all used this phrase today. Clandestine grave.
Hard word, actually.
I know. Let's not use it. So I mean, she basically went through all this and came up with her full report and made her recommendations. And she went through these like under cross-exam from Brendan Grehan. And basically there was 3 scenarios, one of which was that Tina Satchwell was concealed within the house. The others were that she was killed in the house and that her body was broken down as it was put and disposed of in other places, or that she was killed in the house and the body taken away fully intact and disposed of elsewhere. Now, she said she has done research herself, and there's also international research, but she's specifically done research on Irish cases that suggests in the case of a female homicide in a domestic situation, that a large number of them are actually concealed within the house, and that the pattern includes trying to conceal the body in the first place and then coming up with a false missing persons report. And so her kind of role in this active investigation then was to come up with where should be searched. So she was part of this group of people, like the investigation team, as the kind of the forensic archaeologist, and she had a colleague, Mr. Hart, as well, and there was a forensic anthropologist that was brought in as well. We haven't heard from this person yet, and they had between this group there was a plan to come up with, and we heard some of this earlier on in the day. It was the retired Detective Sergeant Shane Kern from the Technical Bureau. And they were talking about they had a plan to take down all the plasterboarding that had been put up in the house, and to basically take out the extension that had been built at the back of the house and search the ground underneath. And they had ground radar. They had
that extension
metal detectors.
had been built since Tina Satchwell went missing.
That wasn't made clear.
Yeah,
they were going to take it all down anyway, and they'd already started some ground clearance work at the back, or in early on the. This is Tuesday the 10th of October and Wednesday the 11th. So this is all on the search that we've already heard about on Tuesday the 10th of October. So we're going on the Tuesday, Wednesday and the Thursday. And it's Thursday then when the Tina Satchwell's remains are actually identified in Cork University Hospital. Isn't
it interesting that Dr. McCullough's 3 scenarios, all 3 of them are that she was killed in the house? Because, of course, the now Superintendent Anne-Marie Toomey kind of came to that conclusion as well, on the basis that, of the CCTV, of the witness statements and whatever else was taken, that she never left that house alive.
Yeah, and Dr. McCullough was recommending, let's search it again, but an intrusive, invasive search, at the level of a forensic archaeologist, as if they were going in to do a dig on an ancient ruin, that you pick up absolutely everything.
So they were convinced that she was in there, and presumably, and obviously at this stage, that Satchwell was lying to them, had been lying to the media, and had been sort of spinning a yarn that his wife was maybe alive, needed a bit of headspace from him, that they had rowed, that she had gone off with money, all these kind of things. They had come to the conclusion at this point that he'd lied. And of course, the state's case now is that he had killed Tina Satchwell. On Friday, when you were talking with Niall, you were talking a lot about the dog, Fern, the cadaver dog that came in. I was listening to you. And so the cadaver dog comes in and kind of goes ballistic around the stairwell.
Well, indications, I think, was
right.
The dog's body language changed.
Yeah.
And so so you have the staircase that's in the sitting room. And there's now a little red brick wall that's kind of covered in the alcove that's there.
Right.
Would have been where under the stairs had been. And that there was a cubby hole then at one end of it. But there's a settee up against this brick wall. And there would have been, at the higher end of the space under the stairs, would have been a back door into the house. Now, that had been covered over with plasterboard, so that had been walled up. And the settee was up against the brick wall. So the dog initially on the Tuesday was reacting at the bottom of the stairs at one end of where the brick wall is, and at the other end where the old back door would have been.
Was, yeah.
Which was still there and was exposed when they took out the plasterboard.
Yeah.
So the following day then, and we've heard this already, and we hear it again today, that the settee and a lot of the clutter, including the cement mixer and all sorts of bits and pieces that were in the house, were taken out. And the dog was brought in again and again gave an indication under the stairs that was something there. But it wasn't just Fern. There was other forensic. There was one particular officer gave evidence today, Brian Barry, and he noticed there was an obvious colour difference between the concrete of the original concrete and this place under the cubbyhole. They brought in a strong light, and there was one of the builders there, and he and the builder discussed it, and they thought they'll have a look and see what's there. And actually, one of the guys, a fellow called James McNamara, he was the builder who was tasked with going in. There was only room for one person under the stairs at this stage, and he went in and started breaking up breaking up the concrete covering. And, and as Brendan Grehan called it, an exploratory hole was dug. And as soon as he saw a bit of plastic sheeting, that was it. He backed out.
Yeah.
Guards were,
There's something here.
He called in one of the officers and they shut down the scene then. And
the house was terraced, was it?
It was a terraced 3-story house.
3-story. So if I'm imagining it correctly, then it's narrow, we said before, and tall.
Yeah,
house,
there's small spaces, these rooms.
Yeah. So you're obviously coming in, and the sitting room, the back door, so the stairwell must run across the back wall of the house, facing you as you come in the door.
No, as far as I figure it out now, and it's hard to visualize it. Like, we don't have the advantage of the album photographs that the jury are getting. But as far as I can see it, and looking at the video that one of the forensic officers showed in court last Friday, that it's running up on the side wall.
Okay.
So it's like the front door, like if you stand at the front door, you can nearly see the old back door, and you're looking up the stairs, and it's slightly to your left, and then you're kind of going into the living space to your right.
But that you're sort of walking in the front door essentially to a square room, which is your living. So if the couch is up against the stairwell,
there's actually a slight hallway.
Okay.
And to the right there was a locked door, which actually was accessed then around the other side through French doors from this living space.
Right.
And then the kitchen was separate again. Like, you had to go past. It was before the stairs, and there was a gap in there.
Sounds like a very peculiar house.
Yeah, no, it is. It's one of these. It's one of these very old houses
that
was built right at the quays in Youghal. So I mean,
and then
it's
there was bits of DIY done on it over the years, presumably, which.
Yeah, and it's absolutely full of clutter, and you can see that. Like, every surface is filled with all sorts of household items and builders' items and debris. For lack of a better word.
Stairwell. So is the couch in the sitting room, and then you have a concrete mixer in the middle of the sitting room as well.
Yeah.
Just to make it even more chaotic, but the couch is up against the stairwell. So is there a wall between, like, there's not an open stairs behind the couch?
No, there is. That's exactly what it is. It's like the staircase is in the living space area. Yeah. So and the I suppose the settee is up against the side of the staircase.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I don't know why when we were talking about it there, I had these visions. You know the way you can, because of course the jury have at least seen the pictures of this space, but I had a vision of the sitting room being, a separate room, that the stairs would be in a kind of a hallway and stuff. So in other words, where the body was discovered was actually in the sitting room, even though we're describing it as under the stairs.
Well, they're calling this area the living space. And then there's another room. I remember I said to you there was a locked door on the right-hand side, but then you go around the corner and you're in the living space. And if you continue to look to the right, there's a French doors, and in there is what the sitting room was. And that's when we saw in the video that the TV was still on.
Right.
So this is the video that was taken on, early in the search on Tuesday, the 10th of October.
Right. Okay. So anyway, they've discovered that you're hearing this evidence today, obviously in court, but somebody has noticed David. What was the guard's name?
Well, if we go back, it's Brian Barry who noticed the discoloration. But like that was kind of a couple of hours in at this stage. This is actually we're into Wednesday when he notices this. So we're hearing the evidence initially from a retired detective sergeant, Shane Curran, the ex-technical bureau. And his job was he was a crime site and scene manager. Was basically his job was to coordinate what was going on, and they talked about how they went in, initially, and of course his job was to liaise with the forensic archaeologist and the dog handler and all the rest of it, and when they were actually at a conference in Middleton with the forensic archaeologist, Niamh McCullough, he got a phone call from Brian Barry to say that they'd found an area that the concrete was poor, and they had broken it using contractors, and 54 centimetres down have found some black plastic. And he thought this was very, very important. It was the way Brian Barry took it. He was told to stop, and the archaeologist then came in to take over, and I think that was around 7 or 8 o'clock on the Wednesday evening, and he just kept a watching brief for the rest of that dig. And then he goes into the Thursday in his evidence, and they talk about the builders took away the red brick that would have been to the side of the staircase. So they've taken that out, obviously, and it's said again later in court that this is to allow the two forensic archaeologists to work at the same time, because the grave site is the full length of under the stairs. It's not like a whole. It's like a full length grave. Like,
and we actually talked about 54 centimeters down. So is it level to the floor, or is it dug down?
It's dug down. So from the floor down is 54 to the top of where they're reaching the black plastic. And we hear later, like it's something like 0.8 meters, so it's 84, 85 centimeters down to the bottom of the grave. And while they're saying that this is actually quite deep, and he talked about Shane Kern has said that he would have had experience of recovery of people in archaeological remains, so to speak, being recovered. And he says this is unusually deep, that normally they'd only be kind of 2 foot deep. So it was quite a deep grave for this kind of situation. So he was 23 years in the technical bureau. So he was quite an experienced officer in this regard. And he was asked, was it a kind of a complex crime scene, this one? And he said, yes, it was. And there was a lot of parts to it. Yes, there was. And he said, approximately every 5 years, there's searches. Every year there's about 5 searches involving forensic archaeologists. So it's not usual, but it's not uncommon. It's it does happen. And he talked about 20 people have been found in what they were called as clandestine burials. And this is why they brought in the metal detector and the ground radar. It says, for instance, the metal detector, in these cases, there's usually a belt buckle or a ring, so the metal detector can be useful. But in this case, it wasn't, because the grave was untypically deeper than they would expect in kind of similar cases.
Okay.
So, and there was explaining like the way these kind of forensic digs work. The idea is initially to be as the least invasive as possible. So you're carefully stripping away the layers of the soil. So you're looking at anything that might turn up that is potential evidence. And then when you get to the point where you've uncovered, I suppose, the body, then you completely take out what you need to take out, which in this case was that they took out a wall. Obviously they had to take out flooring and stuff like that as well. So they worked from there, and he went through all the assistants they had, the cadaver dogs and all the different specialists, and he was asked about the plan in advance. He said that was again devised by the full team, that there was going to be structural changes to the house, that the extension was going to be demolished and the ground underneath search. So that's where they were going in to take the place apart essentially. And he said that changed, though, when the dog Fern showed significant interest, and then Garda Barry found the concrete discoloration, which is in the same area where the dog made the indication. So they started then to go in to go into that. And they tried the ground penetrating radar, which sends pulses into the ground and shows up any anomalies. But they said it was so. It said it was partly the depth of the grave, and it was so confined it didn't really work.
Space, yeah, because I've seen those things, and they're machines. Like maybe they have smaller handheld ones now, but they sort of X-ray under the soil. But they usually use them on top of the ground and outdoor, and they're almost like a lawnmower from memory.
Right, okay,
I'm sure they have handheld ones as well, but yeah. I can imagine trying to work under the stairs must be really
They didn't get into it.
Yeah.
I suppose it didn't matter because it didn't work.
Yeah.
And the reason why the soil was so easy to dig was that it's so close to the sea, and it was quite sandy. They were actually found seashells and stuff like partial. Like this is mentioned again by Eamon McCullough. And when they got down to on Wednesday, the excavation, I think it was at 8:35 on the Wednesday night, they confirmed there was human remains in the black plastic, in the wrapping. Basically, they uncovered the fingers or a hand partial, and they knew then, obviously, this is, they found what they were looking for, essentially. And so they shut down the search and started again the following morning. And this is when the two forensic archaeologists and the anthropologist, who we haven't heard from yet, and a pathologist, Margaret Bolster, they arrived in then on the Thursday morning, and they assisted the two forensic archaeologists in the dig, while the technical bureau officers, their role really at that stage is to oversee and provide any assistance that the experts needed. And
to kind of like break it a bit for a second, in the meantime, and we've heard this evidence last week, Richard Satchwell was in Garda custody.
He was in Garda custody until about 5 o'clock on the Wednesday. Right. So, and what had he told them up until 5 o'clock on the Wednesday when he was released? Well, he'd been shown photographs of the initial start of the search, and he was shown the cubbyhole with the floor. I think it was hard to see, but you could see the kind of the concrete floor, the cubbyhole. And he was asked, like, what's in there and what's behind that? And he said, I don't know. And he said, "What did you keep in the cubbyhole? Bits and pieces." Like, he wasn't offering up any information, any further.
So he's sticking with this story that he's given to people that that Tina Satchwell is gone missing, that he last saw her alive in the house. He went to do a message for her, came back, she was gone, her phone was there, the dogs were there, and she had left with this suitcase of money that we've heard evidence
probably never existed.
To the contrary, never existed, really.
Yeah. I mean, the forensic accountant on Friday kind of said in his opinion, there was no way they could have accrued this kind of money.
So by the time he's released on Wednesday, he still hasn't budged from that narrative.
No, he hasn't budged, but he knows that, I suppose, it's obvious that Gardaí have started picking holes in his statements. He was confronted about 3 people who he had said things about Tina, or had told him, that he did the right thing about not reporting it for 4 days before he did. That, he's been confronted, or rather it's been put to him that, what you said, these people said, hasn't been corroborated, that they've said different things to the guards in the statement. So I suppose it's a kind of an unraveling of his narrative at that stage. But that's the first indication we've heard.
And where does he go on the Wednesday night? Because he can't go back to the house, obviously, which is now a crime scene.
Well, that's what we're told. He was given a hotel room and a new phone, so that obviously he could make his phone calls, whatever he needs to do, or I'm sure if the guards need to phone him, they'll be able to contact him as well. So, I mean, the search was ongoing. So, I mean, even when they're releasing him at that stage, from what we know now, with this evidence that we hear today, it was still, they were still at the black plastic poking out from the soil from where the builder had worked, and it hadn't advanced to the point where they knew for definite there was human remains.
Okay.
So they don't find that out until at whatever time that was, 8:35 that evening.
On the Wednesday.
On the Wednesday night.
Yeah. So what happens next?
So again, we get this kind of account of the search, and we get it from all of the forensic officers, because they all had a different role to play. But essentially, her body is removed. They opened the plastic sheeting and observed the human remains there, and closed it back. Now, it was described as being kind of wrapped around her, that she was lying in it and was folded over her. Mm-hmm. She was also wearing a blanket. She was in kind of a dressing gown or whatever. So that was folded back, and then the entirety was lifted out. So her remains with the black plastic was put into a body bag, and then that was taken to Cork University Hospital, where the post-mortem was done the next day by Margaret Bolster. And was she buried in anything else? Or was she just in the bathrobe? Was there any other personal items? She was, yeah. Well, we get to this. So when they actually do the post-mortem, we have Detective Karen McCarthy, who was there throughout the search, but she was also at the post-mortem. And while she was there, she was given certain items by the assistant state pathologist,
Margaret Bolster.
Bolster. And there were a bunch of things that she was given, and she put in her evidence bag, and they named them with their initials. So these are all KMCC 1 to 6, and so they found this purse. The dressing gown on the body was KMCC 6. That was the exhibitory. So that was given to her, and she took it and labelled it. And in that, a purse was found in the left pocket. And in the purse, it's also described as a wallet in evidence today. They found a public service card in Tina Satchwell's name, a Holland and Barrett reward card, an Extra Vision card, a Rathcormac car boot sale identification, a Tesco Club Care card in TM Satchwell name, and a Boots Advantage card. And they also took samples of DNA from a head hair and a toenail as well. So this is presumably to match up, I guess, with the DNA that they already we've heard from the hairbrush that was taken previously, where there was already a DNA profile done that was sent out as part of the Europol appeal. And
from that piece of evidence, we understand then that she was far from skeletal remains, given that there was hair and toenail samples to be taken. Well,
no, they actually do say that it was almost skeletal. We actually hear just at the very end of the day, we got some. We heard a statement from a consultant dentist who basically was brought in to make a dental record of the near skeletal remains. And that's how he described them. And he made a dental record of the remains that they had in the mortuary and compared to them to her dentist in Fermoy. And they said they were an absolute perfect match and there's no anomalies. So they were able to identify her, and she was declared, Tina Satchwell was declared dead in the mortuary that Thursday evening. So that was the first time they had definitive proof it was Tina Satchwell and that she was dead.
So
there was other items taken as well. So you had the false nails taken from the hands of the deceased, and then there was a dressing gown belt, which was described as being wrapped around the body. Again, there was no
detail of what part of the body
or anything like that. And there was also, as I mentioned, the blanket that was wrapped around the body as well. And there was the dressing gown, the PJ top, pajama top, and underwear as well. And then there was also shards of glass that were taken from the head and the arms, and a belly button piercing, and as well as the final kind of item the final evidential item taken was the actual black plastic sheeting that had been wrapped around her. So that was that particular witness, in terms of what they took for evidence at the post-mortem. We haven't heard the post-mortem report yet.
Right.
So that still has to come.
And in the opening, did we hear about a cause of death?
No, we heard, no, exactly. We didn't hear about a cause of death because what we heard was that Dr. Bolster said she couldn't determine a cause of death because of the decomposition at this stage. So there was nothing to indicate how she died in that regard. But we have Richard Satchwell's version of events, which, the state mentioned in their opening statement that she was trying to stab him in the head with a chisel. He lost his footing, was on his back, and used a belt to restrain her. And that while he was holding her off him with this belt, she went limp and died.
And if there was, if cause of death was asphyxiation, you wouldn't necessarily have marks left on the skeletal remains. Sure, you wouldn't.
I don't know. Like, to be honest, it's. I'm sure there might
unless there was pressure. I'm trying to think in other cases, but so has there been? There's been no evidence yet in relation to whether there was any marks found on the remains or any injuries on the bones.
No, we haven't. We haven't actually got the PM report. All we have is the evidence of the forensic guard who, having left the search with the body or followed to the mortuary after the body, was then given certain items that were taken from the body, and she put in the evidence bags that are now being brought to court.
So I'm jumping ahead a little bit too quickly. You'll expect that.
The closest. I mean, there was the PM report that was done by Margaret Bolster, but there was also then the dental forensic report done. That was carried out by Professor Paul Grady, which I already mentioned that he had gone through. How he basically created a dental report. Now, this statement was read out. He didn't appear in court. This is one of the Section 21, where it was agreed by both sides that a witness could read out, or a witness's statement could be read out. There wasn't going to be any kind of legal argument, I suppose, over it, or any kind of cross-examination needed. And that was used then to make the formal declaration of her death. And as well as that, at that point, I think that was when Brendan Grehan stood up and said that there was a formal admission on the defence part that the remains of those covered, the remains that had been recovered were those of Tina Satchwell.
They're not going to argue that.
Yeah, so that was admitted. There was no again there was no legal argument, or there's no contest, rather, I suppose, in court over who was in this grave that they found.
It's a fairly gruesome sort of scenario and scene that has been, detailed there today, of a body under the stairs, a skeletal remains, wrapped up in the black plastic and a blanket, and, the dressing gown on and the purse in the pocket of the dressing gown and all the rest of it. It's pretty gory stuff. I mean, to imagine that scene in that house and what was being found and the amount of people that were in there excavating under the stairs and all. Did Satchwell himself react to any of this today?
No, I mean, he sits, I mean, the jury are looking at him, and as far as I can see from the jury's point of view, he's sitting in the same position the whole time.
Right. Okay. Is he still taking his notes?
I don't know. I actually, where he's sitting, I actually can't see whether he's taking notes.
What court are you in 26? Because I'll have to cover it.
Court 6.
Court 6, yeah. I'll have to be there one day this week, won't I? At the very least, so I can have a little look myself. So yeah, it's motoring along still, though, all the same, isn't it? This trial. I mean, what did we say? 5 to 6 weeks? It's not going to, surely.
Yeah, I mean, well, the judge told the jury on one early in. When they asked the question, like, how long was it going to last, and he told them 5 weeks. So it looks like it's going to be a bit shorter than that now at this stage.
And what about, so again on the defence, Brendan Grehan for Satchwell isn't really kicking up much.
Well, he's going through a lot of the kind of, he like all of the forensic officers were cross-examined today, and just to go through really their statement in much greater detail than had originally been opened by the state. But there was very little in terms of, I mean, there was no contest as such, you know. I mean, he was just being very methodical and making sure that, you know, everything was correctly explained to the jury and made obvious what certain things mean.
So the big kind of things to come will be his admissions, in as much as what he gave in admission, saying that there was a row, that she came at him with a chisel. They argued and he ended up basically with the cord of her dressing gown, was it?
Yeah, and we know from the opening statement as well that there's another interview to come where he basically tells the guards the story, and this comes after the body has been found. So I presume we're going to possibly hear that at some point this week.
So the big sort of, I suppose, the big remaining item to come is, and now I've remembered what I was going to say as well, so we'll say both things, is sort of his admission as he changes his narrative under rearrest this time as the body of his wife is found. But also, so Richard Satchwell can take the stand if he wishes in his own defence. He can get in and give evidence. It's not that often that an accused does that or takes up that option, but he could.
Yeah. I mean, well, the onus of proof is on the state in criminal cases. So quite often, for lots of different reasons, you know, defence counsel would advise their clients not to take the stand. It's as simple as that. And in some cases they say, yeah, do, depending on whether they think it's in the best interest of their client. Yes,
some do, some don't. As I said, slightly unusual, but that will be interesting to see if he does do that, if he does take the stand and give evidence himself, and that if we hear what he has to say himself, which is undoubtedly what this story that he has told police about his, you know, this set to that he had with his wife, and that they had sort of ongoing arguments, really, is what he has said. It's hard to get an image out of your head of Richard Satchwell sitting in the living room watching television on the couch with the body of his wife in the wall behind him, literally.
Which is certainly the state's case.
Yeah.
That, you know, he remained in the house. I mean, you can see in the video, which the jury saw, that when they went in on Tuesday the 10th, the TV in the living room was still on.
And this is nearly 6.5 years after she's gone missing.
6.5 years, yeah. And say 2 years after, I suppose, the new detective inspector took over.
Yeah. And he told police that he put her body in, that he killed her after this sort of row broke out, that he put her body in a freezer and then he moved her in under the stairs. The evidence that the jury have heard is that he then tried to sell or get rid of that freezer from the garden on Dundee.
That's right, yeah.
And that is there any evidence given around the kind of works that were going on in the house?
No.
Is he doing constant renovations? I mean, they did talk about they had bought the house, hadn't they, and intended to renovate it.
Yeah, no, it's just mentioned in general terms. I mean, you know, it's seen in the pictures taken in the 2017 search, and it's referred to like in, you know, by Detective Inspector Toomey as well. That part of the search warrant for the invasive search was based on the fact that they could see structural changes had been made, that there was new plasterboard put up. And that, you know, there was, I guess, partition walls or whatever moved or put up. And this was one of their causes for concern. And if they, you know, especially now armed with the report from the forensic archaeologists that there's a possibility that Tina's remains could be still in the house somewhere. So this was it definitely was one of the key reasons, I think, that they went in for this search, that they were pretty convinced at this stage that the only logical explanation was that the body was somewhere in the house.
It's a fascinating trial, and it certainly captured the interest of people watching it and listening to the podcast. So thanks very much, Eamon.
Always a pleasure, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe.
Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.